Hello everyone, I'm Don Arleth and you're watching Midday Report, where we track the most important stories of the day for you. Let's go ahead and get started. With the ceasefire in Gaza and the recent return of Israeli hostages, hopes for ending the war in Ukraine have once again resurfaced with urgency. U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to welcome his Ukrainian counterpart in Washington on Friday, with the aim of maintaining momentum for peace.
In the Middle East, Monday marked what seemed like one of the most joyful days in recent years. All Israeli hostages returned home after 2 years. Almost 2,000 Palestinians were released from Israeli jails.
This is a tremendous day for the world. It's a tremendous day for the Middle East.
The ceasefire is in effect in Gaza. The US, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey signed the Gaza Declaration to ensure that the peace lasts, but many questions remain.
The Trump plan, as it's called, is very, very sketchy, with many elements that remain to be defined, whether it's Israeli withdrawal, whether it's Hamas's disarmament, whether it's governance and security in Gaza.
But hopes are high nonetheless.
The signal is coming from here. When the international community stands together, it is possible. It must not only be possible here, it must also be possible in other regions of the world. For us Europeans, this war in Europe is the greatest threat to our freedom.
On Friday, Donald Trump will meet the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, at the White House.
Zelensky and the European partners have to maintain that attempt, to be honest with you, to manipulate Trump's ego, to flatter him, to say, yes, you can have the Nobel Peace Prize, because this may not be a question of reaching a deal with Russia. It may be a question of pushing back Vladimir Putin, who is still intent on conquering Ukraine.
Ukrainian officials have long said that Putin is not willing to end the war in Ukraine and will have to be pressured to sit at the negotiating table. That's why Kyiv has welcomed signals that the US might give Ukraine long-range Tomahawk missiles.
It would be nice if Trump actually followed through on one of these promises to Zelensky. He's offered support, military support, several times. He's threatened Russia with all sorts of sanctions.
Ukrainians are still waiting for their ceasefire and the end of the war. Getting there, however, is expected to be a lengthy and difficult process.
Showing the Kremlin that continuing the war against Ukraine will lead them to a potential total economic disaster that could cause political instability in the country could be the way for Donald Trump to persuade Vladimir Putin into negotiations. That's according to TVP World's guest Aaron Korewa from the Atlantic Council.
That Trump has expressed frustration with Vladimir Putin and that this is not going the way that he imagined. Early on, Trump basically offered Vladimir Putin a lot of carrots in the forms of all these joint economic projects on oil drilling in Alaska, hence, the summit in Alaska and all that other stuff. But of course, what Donald Trump didn't realize, and I assume he has realized at this point, is that Vladimir Putin is not interested in economic prosperity. Economic prosperity development for the sake of economic development is not what the Russian government is after. They have sunk so much into this war that at this point, offering them olive branches and what have you, supposedly it's going to develop their economy, is not going to do the trick. What's going to do the trick is basically if the Russians understand that this path that they're on is only going to lead to further and further disaster for them.
Ukraine has accused Russia of striking several United Nations trucks which were delivering food in the Ukrainian region of Kherson, an attack the Ukrainian foreign minister called a brutal violation of international law. For more on this, let's go live to Kyiv and our correspondent Alex Cadier. Good afternoon, Alex. So what do we know so far about this incident?
Well, good afternoon, Don. Actually, in the last few moments, the United Nations confirming that 4 of its trucks were attacked by Russian drones in that Kherson region, confirming what Andriy Sybiha, the foreign minister of Ukraine, had also said just shortly before that. We heard a statement from the United Nations saying an interagency convoy of 4 humanitarian trucks clearly marked as belonging to the UN, carrying aid, came under attack by the armed forces of Russia, calling such attacks utterly unacceptable and that aid workers are protected by international humanitarian law and should never be attacked. We also have more details, Don, about what was in those trucks. That's according to the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, UNFPA, saying that the convoy was carrying 800 individual packages containing essential items for older persons, women and girls, describing the area where these trucks were operating as having a very high proportion of older people, many of whom are unable to relocate because of drones and shelling, and relying on that humanitarian assistance. Now, we know from Andriy Sibieha, who called this a brutal violation of international law, that 2 of the 4 trucks were damaged. We've seen pictures of those trucks with the windscreen blown out, with the front heavily damaged by what looks like an FPV drone attack, clearly crossing a red line when it comes to international law and attacking aid workers. No comment yet from Moscow about this particular incident, but clearly the Ukrainian side confirming this was an attack by Russia against aid workers, delivering essential needs for women and older women and girls in that Kherson region. So as you were just mentioning, we heard in our last report, there is perhaps hope of more U.S. momentum on bringing peace to this country. But as we've seen, the situation on the ground suggests Russia will rumble on and continue this war for much longer still. Don.
Indeed, Alex Carrier reporting there from Kyiv. Thank you for that. North Korea may have used Russian technology to build its new intercontinental ballistic missile, according to the South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff. The South Korean Minister of Defense said that Pyongyang is also receiving technology needed for submarine development from Russia. North Korea's new intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-20, was presented during a parade on the 80th anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea 4 days ago. As stated by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of South Korea, Yin Yong-sung, North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities are improving. Asked if Moscow supported Pyongyang's research and development programs, Seong said that is very highly likely. Previously, the South Korean press said that Seoul is analyzing reports that Russia could have transferred components crucial in building nuclear-powered submarines to North Korea. At the same time, Pyongyang is actively helping Moscow fight its war against Ukraine, sending artillery systems, ammunition, and troops. Return hubs and Europe's wider migration policy sit at the core of the Justice and Home Affairs meeting in Luxembourg. It comes as Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk reiterated on Tuesday that Poland will not accept any migrants as part of the bloc's new relocation rules, and that Poland is exempt from this part of the package. Let's go now to our EU correspondent Angela Skujins in Brussels. Hello, Angela. So how is this whole development looking on your end there in Brussels and, I guess, over there in Luxembourg?
Good afternoon, Don. So certainly this commentary from the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk this afternoon chimes with the Polish Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński. When he arrived in Luxembourg earlier this morning, he reiterated that Poland is already bearing significant costs of accommodating up to 2 million Ukrainian refugees. This is, of course, due to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine starting from 2022. He also stated that Poland is bearing other costs regarding protecting that eastern flank. We also heard various other commentary from interior ministers significantly demonstrating that the tune is now changing to more conservative migration policies. Perhaps 4 years ago, the idea of a return hub would have been extremely controversial. Various ministers this morning, including the Danish Interior Minister, floated this idea as a very workable possibility. But let's listen to the commentary from the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in the Polish city of Racibov, where he explained the thinking behind this recent statement.
As long as I am in charge of the government in Poland, whatever form the next stages of the migration pact take, Poland has its methods and will not accept any migrants under the relocation mechanism, not a single migrant. As far as we're concerned, this matter is closed.
Now, the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact is expected to kick in from June next year. We've heard from our sources within Brussels that they do expect Poland to toe the line when it comes to the pact. However, we need clarification from them when it comes to this new declaration from Warsaw that they will not implement all of the pact. But the big question is, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine grinds on and as Poland accepts more Ukrainian refugees, what will be offered to Warsaw to accommodate these new arrivals, and particularly what will happen with the issue of return hubs. But that's all from Brussels. I'll send it back to you in Warsaw.
All right, thank you. Angela Skujins reporting for us from Brussels. Climate change is opening the polar region, and while some nations seek to secure it, others push to explore it. A pilot container ship service is connected China and Europe through the Northern Sea route along the coast of Russia, as the Arctic path brings new commercial possibilities. It also comes with risks. Natalia Oriol investigates the cracks in the polar ice.
The Arctic, a polar region in the high north where only the most resilient can thrive. However, climate change is opening routes through the region that once were only a distant possibility. A container ship has crossed the Arctic via the Northern Sea route connecting China and Europe in just 20 days to deliver goods ahead of Christmas. The ship, Istanbul Bridge, is on its way to make last call in Gdańsk on October 18th.
This is, I think, something that we're going to be seeing more and more of as time goes on. We've seen as climate change is fundamentally opening and changing the Arctic maritime route to commercial traffic.
The Northern Sea route runs from the Bering Sea to the Barents Sea along the coast of Russia. The Suez Canal used to be the first passage of choice for maritime traffic. However, after the war in Gaza spilled over to the Middle East and Houthi attacks made it risky, alternatives became more attractive. The Arctic Path is one such alternative. However, not only commercial services might navigate the cracks in the polar ice.
I think that, with the opening of the Northern Sea route, we'll see more and more sanctions evasion through that route. We'll see more of the Russian Shadow Fleet vessels moving across the Russian Arctic, and we'll see other routes to overcome technology export controls restrictions that have been placed on the Russian Federation after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Vessels in the high north need to be ice certified and may require assistance from icebreaker ships. Moscow appears to be in pole position in the global Arctic race, as alongside a geographical foothold, it operates the world's largest icebreaker fleet, estimated at over 40 vessels. One of these ships was already involved in an incident in October 2023, which some have called a sabotage operation.
When that took place and that Chinese-flagged vessel, the New Polar Bear, which of course had both Chinese and Russian ownership associated with it, dragged its anchor for something like 200 nautical miles through the central Baltic Sea and then into the Gulf of Finland, destroying this infrastructure. Who was there with it? The Sevmorput, this Russian nuclear-class icebreaker.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is eyeing a stronger foothold in the Arctic.
President Trump this past summer, this massive bill that he put forward would give more than $8.6 billion to increase the Coast Guard, not the Navy, but the U.S. Coast Guard's icebreaker fleet in the Arctic. And that is done with the high hopes of countering rising Chinese and Russian influence.
The U.S. is set to acquire up to 11 ships after striking a deal with Finland, an industry powerhouse that has designed 80% of the world's icebreakers.
We definitely see the Arctic in the north as a region of geopolitical competition. Obviously, the Trump administration has made no secret of its fact that it sees it in that way as well.
Norway, with its strategic Svalbard region, has made the high north a top priority, while the Danish government has used internal tools to block Chinese investments. As a shorter ice cover makes the Arctic more viable amid geopolitical tensions, questions arise about future power plays in the race to make the polar region a stronghold.
And that's all the time we have here on Midday Report. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you again next time, another time tomorrow. All right, thanks for joining us. Goodbye.